All right, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well today. There is a handout at the back, but it's the handout from last week, which is just simply a carryover into this week. And I just thought I'd bring the extras in there if anybody didn't have one. And there's Mike Manley. Good morning, sir. Now, that got your attention, didn't it? Nobody was paying attention to a word I had to say until I mentioned Mike's name. All right. That's right. That's right. All right, let's turn our Bibles to Daniel chapter 7. We're going to primarily work in chapter 8 today, but I wanted to finish the vision of the four beasts from last week. We saw that the first beast was the empire, the kingdom of Babylon, and it was described to us as like a lion. The second of the empires was Medo-Persia, like a bear. The third was Macedonia, Greece, which was like a leopard. And Rome was the one that was different from all of them and was terrifying and had gnarly teeth and would wear out or wear down the saints of God. It was terrifying, and it would attack the church. These are the same empires, you may recall, as Nebuchadnezzar's first dream that he had of the giant statue with the head of gold, the chest of silver, the thighs of bronze, and the legs of iron and miry clay. God is communicating with Nebuchadnezzar, telling him the history that was going to unfold. Now he is communicating with Daniel, telling him the history that's going to unfold, and reinforcing the idea that God is the sovereign God, the God who is sovereign over all of the nations. Now, this is going to further tie in to our look at each of these visions and this idea of God being sovereign, because as you remember, we have been looking at this exile concept in a couple of different directions, but one of them is the reality that God brought the Hebrew people out of Egypt and planted them as a distinct nation. And then he was calling the Gentiles to himself, and he was wanting the Gentiles to come and to see his glory. But when the Hebrew people broke covenant with him, he now has sent them into exile. And so what he has done is he has taken his covenant people and planted them among the nations. And that is a foreshadowing of the church. That is exactly what God has done. And we're going to see that this is what God is talking about and what God is working with each of these visions, and ultimately the fulfillment of these visions. So we have these four beasts. We looked at the book of Revelation. We saw how in chapter 13, the beast of Revelation is one that, just like each of these four successive beasts, comes up out of the sea. The beast of Revelation is one that comes up out of the sea, and he's under the dominion, under the authority of Satan. And Satan is about to make war against the church, against the covenant people of God. So we see the tie-in beginning right there. But that one beast of Revelation, that is the Roman Empire, that is the persecuting authority of the Roman Empire, was described to us as like a lion, like a bear, like a leopard. And so it is the cumulative impact of these four kingdoms that God raises up, that God is in control of, that we find in the book of Revelation. We saw last week that Daniel chapter 7 mentions that the Ancient of Days, the one like a son of man, is the one who is going to remedy this situation. And he is going to come in the clouds. We looked at all of the occurrences in Scripture of this phraseology of coming in the clouds. And every single time it's used, it's not the judgment at the end of time. It is a specific judgment at a specific point in time against a specific nation. We saw how God uses this terminology of coming in the clouds against Judah. We saw that he uses it against Egypt. And then we see that he uses the phraseology against Rome. And so in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 7, we have that terminology again. Behold, he comes in the clouds. And then throughout the book of Revelation, we find God's judgment against Rome. And it is this judgment that is foreshadowed all the way back in Daniel 7. So we're looking at that. Let's go to the book of Revelation, and let's look at before we go, let's recap in Daniel chapter 7, just to kind of get the picture of what we're looking for when we get there. All right, let's go to chapter 7 and verse 21. This is Daniel speaking. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war against the saints and overpowering them. Until the Ancient of Days came, judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be like the fourth kingdom on earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of the kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. He will intend to make alterations in time and law, and they will be given into his hand for time, times, and half a time. Remember that phrase right there, because we're going to see it in the book of Revelation. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. In other words, Rome will not last. Where is the Roman Empire right now? It is on the ash heap of history, as they say. God foretold the end of the Roman Empire before it ever began. We can't miss that point there. Just as he had foretold the rise to greatness of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, and the fall of Babylon, and then the rise of Persia and the fall of Persia. He has predicted the rise of Greece and the fall of Greece. And he had predicted the rise of Rome and the fall of Rome. And this beautiful aspect of predictive prophecy is the greatest single proof that the Bible is God's Word. Go ahead, try it if you want to. Anyone care to predict, and we'll go ahead and write it down, what kingdom is going to rule the earth 600 years from now? You want to take a stab at it? Yeah, me neither. We can't do that. Humans can't do that. There's too many variables, too much unknown. Who would have ever thought that the little colony over across the pond was going to rise to greatness in the 1800s and 1900s? Nobody could have predicted that, but yet it happened. All right, so here we have all of this that is being predicted here. And then verse 27 and 28, then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole of heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. In other words, God's people will be dispersed among all of the kingdoms of the earth. This is precisely what he has been saying. This was what the exile did. It was the preparing of that, the preparation for that. And it says his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. This everlasting kingdom would be established, according to Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, the legs of miry clay and iron that was struck by the rock that was not hewn by human hands. In the days of those kings, in the days of the fourth of these kingdoms, in the days of the Roman Empire, this eternal kingdom would be established. That was, of course, the church, the kingdom of God. And then we see it in verse 28. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, but I kept the matter to myself. All right, so now let's go to the book of Revelation, just kind of get a little bit of recapping there and see how the Spirit gave visions to the Apostle John, and he was telling him these same things were now about to happen. This is when everything was coming to a head here. Remember the Ancient of Days that was there, and his description as having hair that's white like wool, and eyes, and his feet were like bronze and all. Let's pick up in verse 10 of Revelation chapter 1. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like the sound of a trumpet, saying, write in a book what you see, send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus and Smyrna to Pergamum and Thyatira, to Sardis and Philadelphia and Laodicea. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me. And having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the middle of the lampstands, I saw one like a son of man. That's exactly how Daniel described the hero, the one that would come and take care of business. Clothed in a robe reaching to the feet and girded across his chest with a golden sash. His head and his hair were like white wool, directly out of Daniel 7. Like snow, his eyes were like a flame of fire, directly out of chapter 7. His feet were like burnished bronze when he had been made to glow in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. In his right hand he held the 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword. His face was like the sun, shining in its strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man, and he placed his right hand on me, saying, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. I have the keys of death and of Hades. Therefore write the things which you have seen, the things which are, the things which will take place after these things. As for the mystery of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels, or messengers of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches." What kingdom is in force and in power at the time that John received the revelation? Rome, absolutely. All right, so now the Son of Man, one like a Son of Man, has arrived on the scene to fulfill the prophecies that God foretold way back during the exile in Babylon, hundreds of years before these events actually take place. Now look over in chapter 5 and remember the sovereignty talk and the things that Daniel was foreseeing, and how all of the kingdoms would be given to him. People out of every tribe and nation and language would come into the kingdom and would be under the lead of the Ancient of Days, the one like a Son of Man. All of chapter 5 is a scene where the Lion of Judah, Jesus, the Ancient of Days, is given this scroll with 7 seals. But let's go and drop down to verse 7. "And he came and he took the book out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne." This is Jesus. "And when he had taken the book, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. They sang a new song, saying, 'Worthy are you to take the book.'" And remember, back in Daniel chapter 7, the books were opened. All right, so here we have a foreshadowing of this scene. "You were slain and purchased for God with your blood men from every tribe and tongue and people and language. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will reign upon the earth. Then I looked, and behold, the voice of many angels around the throne, and the living creatures, and the elders, and the number of them was myriads of myriads, thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, 'Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing.' And every created thing which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth and on the sea and all the things in them, I heard saying, 'To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and dominion forever and ever.' And the 4 living creatures bowed down and said, 'Amen.' And they all worship the sovereign God, the one that Daniel spoke about. So we have in the visions, in the dreams, as well as in the book of prophecy in the New Testament, we have the same concept going on, that God is in control of the nations, and that God is the one who seats kings, and God is the one who takes them down. And this is reassuring. It should be reassuring for all of us that this is what is in play, that God is in control, that God is the one who is the master of all of these things. And it's not this life that ultimately matters. It is the life that is to come. And that kingdom that we are added to, we are translated into when we obey the gospel, that kingdom is everlasting. It does not end. And so we have that assurance and we have that reassurance from God throughout time that if we are His saints, if we are the chosen ones, if we are the ones now that are planted among the kingdoms of the world, that we're part of a kingdom that'll never end. And we have great reassurance there. Now this phrase, time, times, and half a time, it is prophetic God speak. It's confusing in a lot of ways, but it's kind of interesting the way the book of Revelation kind of goes around the corner to teach us what it really means. Simply put, time is 1 year. If time is 1 year, how many years might times be? 2. Hey, there we go. All right. And then half a time, how much might that be? All right. Who are the mathematicians in the crowd? 1 plus 2 plus 1/2 is how much? 3.5. All right. 3.5 years. All right. Let's look at further in the book of Revelation. Let's see what else we're told about the time of the dominion of Satan, of this beast, this persecuting power that's going to wear down the church and wear out the saints of God. Look in chapter 11, verse 2 and 3. Leave out the rest of the court which is outside the temple. Do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. All right, quickly. How long is 42 months? 3.5 years. We have a math scholar right here. Either that or he's not looking at his Bible. Oh, he's reading the screen. Okay. It's an open book test. Now I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. Everybody see that? All right, so they're telling us without telling us. The Bible is telling us exactly how long of a period of time this is going to be. All right, chapter 12 is a beautiful vision in the book of Revelation where this woman who is arrayed in all the finery of heaven, she is representative of the covenant people of God. She is presented to us in chapter 12 as being pregnant. All right, so put on your thinking caps. Prior to giving birth to the one like a son of man, she is the covenant people of God, Israel. After she gives birth to the He-Man, to the Savior of mankind, who might she be then? The church. There we go. All right, so it is God's covenant people, and this is the one that Satan is enraged at because he can't kill her. He can't kill her, and he can't kill that son, so he goes to wage war against, quote, the rest of her children. That would be you. That would be me. That would be the Christians who were going to suffer under the Roman persecution. So we have that tie in there. But look in chapter 12 and verse 6. The woman fled to the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. Or times and half a time, or 3.5 years, or 42 months. It's all the same sequence is given to us and taught to us here. And then if you look in verse 14, but the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness. There's a description in the Old Testament where God told Israel when he brought them out of Egypt and he brought them out of the grasp of this empire, and he put her in the wilderness to take her out of their grasp, that he did so on wings of eagles. So it's the same phraseology in prophecy that is being used here, where she was nourished for time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And this serpent, of course, is Satan. Satan could not kill the covenant. It is a kingdom that will last forever. But every individual is in play. The rest of her children, in verse 17, are always at risk in this world. All right, so the dragon was enraged with the woman, the covenant, went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. All right, so that finishes up the first vision that Daniel had and brings us into chapter 8. We're going to have yet another of the the visions and the prophecies that are found there, this one is going to concern the two middle kingdoms. All right? Just generally, why do you think it's important for the people of God in exile to be given these prophecies about what's going to take place historically? Why might that be important? To give them hope, absolutely. To reassure them that what they're going through right now is precisely what God had told them all along would happen. If they were unfaithful to the covenant, if they broke the covenant, that God was going to remove his protection for them and give them over. He prophesied through the later prophets, right before the coming of Babylon. He prophesied by name, the Chaldeans are going to come and they're going to take you away. Your people, your royal people are going to be taken into captivity. Your princes are going to be taken and castrated, and they're going to be put into the service of the king of a foreign nation. All these things were prophesied. Yet for some of them who weren't listening to the prophets, it was a shock. They couldn't believe this happened. They're God's chosen people. But yet now that this has happened, God is reassuring them and saying, okay, I'm still in control. So that's the purpose of the book of Daniel, is to show the sovereignty of God. So Daniel has another vision. You may remember right there at the end of chapter 7, it says that he was very alarmed after that first vision, even though it had a good outcome. It was devastating to him, but he didn't tell anybody about it. If you look at the end of chapter 8, it says in verse 27, then I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. And I got up again and carried on the king's business. But I was astounded by the vision, and there was none to explain it. So this is wearing him down. So here we have about 550 years before Christ. We have another vision of what's going to take place between Babylon and the Roman Empire that is going to directly affect the Hebrew people. It's going to include Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the abomination that causes desolation, that sacrificed swine on the altar of the temple in Jerusalem. The people ultimately rose up and attacked him to get their temple back, to get the sacrifices back. But it did all of these things were happening to the people to chastise them, to chasten them. All of this was in the under the control of God himself. So here in this vision in chapter 8, it says, in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously, which we were told was in the first year of the reign of this king. So how much time has elapsed between the first year and the third year of the king? There we go. All right. So a couple of years has passed here. It's still in a chronology. We've skipped over chapter 5 and 6 chronologically, and we'll go back to them, and we'll see the death of Belshazzar. I looked in the vision, and while looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Eli Canal. All right, so he's taken to a place where he is going to see a vision that is going to be a prophecy that's going to span over 200 years. It's going to start rather quickly, but it's going to span a couple of hundred years, because it's the rise of not only Cyrus, who would set the Hebrew people back free to go back to Judah, but it's also going to include Alexander the Great. All right, so all of this is handed to Daniel. It is dropped in his lap. It is wearing him out. It is exhausting him. He's keeping these things to himself. He's bearing this burden here. But this too is in fulfillment of prophecy. This was Daniel, a man who rose to great prominence in the exile. But he was a man who lived a long, lonely life. He originally had a couple of friends in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but we don't hear much about them anymore. They have risen to prominence. They're probably elsewhere in the empire doing the same thing that Daniel's doing here. But notice what Isaiah said. Again, before Babylon even came. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming, when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up to this day shall be carried to Babylon. Mention them by name." And yet they were surprised when it happened. "Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, and some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Predictive prophecy and its precise fulfillment. This should give us great hope and give us encouragement that our God is in control. He's telling us and has told us Christ will come again. If nothing else, we should rest firm in our assurance that prediction by the same God who predicted this, by the same God who predicted the rise and fall of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, is the God who tells us that Christ is coming again. That should give us great hope here. All right, but Daniel is an old man at this point. Now, this is a rough chronology here, but he may be as old as 73 years at this point. So a lot of time has spanned between the time when he was brought into exile at the age of about 17. We don't know exactly when that was, within a year or two, but it's close to the time that Nebuchadnezzar became the king there, a co-regent there. But he ruled for 43 years. So we'll take the maximum here. That's why we say as much as. Then we have this succession of kings that followed him. And then we're told that in the third year of Belteshazzar, he gets this vision. You add all those up, 73 years. He's an old man. He's an old man who is bearing these burdens. He is a eunuch. He is alone, and he is serving a foreign king, but he never fails to serve his God. He gets in trouble. We'll go back and look at the lion's den. Daniel in the lion's den. Far too often we picture this as the same 17-year-old boy that was there in the first chapter. He's not a young man anymore. He was an old man who was thrown to the lions, just as we have here, because the lion's den occurs after this. So Daniel is advanced in age. And again, remember, after seeing this vision, he says he was sick for days. It wore him out. It was a heavy, heavy burden. So what is this vision that caused him so much trouble here? Look in verses 3 and 4. And then again, this is like chapter 7. We'll get the vision and then we'll get the interpretation. So we're going to kind of look at these in that way instead of reading straight through here. We'll look at it and see what the Bible itself tells us that these visions represent. "Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power. But he did as he pleased, and he magnified himself." This is the rise of King Cyrus. Again, it was predicted, and Cyrus was called by name in Isaiah 44 and the first couple of verses of chapter 45. God has made no bones about this, but God predicted this king even before he was born. In fact, before his parents came into power and prominence, God called him by name, and he was the one that was going to shepherd the people back into the promised land. The 2 horns here. Horns are prophetic language, apocalyptic language for power. We saw them; they were kings back in the chapter 7, the vision there. But here, this is the Medes and the Persians, and one is longer than the other. The Persian Empire was greater than the empire of the Medes, and the two were brought together, they were blended together under Cyrus. You may know some of the kings of the Persians: Xerxes, Ahasuerus, and Artaxerxes. Xerxes was not a nice guy, but he was a tremendously powerful king. If you've seen 300 in the Battle of Thermopylae, Xerxes was the dude that came rolling up against the Spartans and met his fate there. He was determined to roll over all of Europe. And he said that that would satisfy him if he reigned from India all the way to England. That's all. Anybody, would y'all be satisfied with that? So this guy thought a lot of himself. And yet this big horn there, this larger of the two horns, represents him. The Persians became dominant. And the first Persian king to reign over the Medo-Persian Empire was a fellow named Cyrus. And just as God predicted here, the expansion that took place under Cyrus was west, and then north, and then south, starting in fundamentally modern day Iran. That is the Persia of history. And so it swept into Babylon, modern day Iraq, and into Judah, the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, etc. Then it goes goes up into Syria and Asia Minor, and then down into Egypt. That's where he expanded to. God predicted it right here. All right, so let's look at this guy, Cyrus the Great, Cyrus the Second here. He ruled Persia from 559 BC to 530 BC. He was the son of a king and the daughter of the king of the Medes. So he had a rightful claim to this throne. It wasn't a hostile takeover. But when his dad died, he got his dad's throne. When his grandfather died, he got his grandfather's throne. And then over a period of 20 years, he conquered. He was compared to, say, Xerxes, he was a good king. But he was a conqueror, and he expanded this, and there was nobody that could stand against him. And so he liberated Babylon in the almost overnight conquest that we saw at the end of Belteshazzar's life after the handwriting on the wall. If you remember that scene, we will go back to it here in a couple of weeks. But that's when the Babylonians were told, you've been weighed in the balance and you've been found wanting. And so this turnover came almost bloodlessly, almost overnight, and it occurred on October 29th of 539 BC. That was the official fall of Babylon, and it was Cyrus the Great that did that. The whole Medo-Persian Empire lasted about 114 years. We have Cyrus, 9 years, Cambyses and Smerdis, a guy who tried to take the kingdom from his own brother by killing him. You know, kings do what kings do. But then you have Darius or Darius, who ruled for 35 years, and Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes. We encounter him in the Bible during the book of Esther. We don't think about Esther being married to this Xerxes, the guy that wanted to conquer all of Europe and all of that, but that's who this king is and was. But you may remember a detail in the story of Esther that kind of tells you what his character is. Esther didn't want to go in and see him. Do you remember that? Why didn't she want to go in and see him? Why would she be killed? If he didn't summon her and she goes strolling into the throne room, he would kill her. I'm sorry. I don't know what your expectations are, ladies, of your husband. That's not a good guy. And so, you know, he's a bad guy, but he is the one that allowed the Jews to defend themselves and save the Jewish people in the remnant of Babylon here. And then there was Artaxerxes, who was the king during Ezra and Nehemiah, who reigned for 41 years, and then Alexander the Great came. So that's what the ram is, this first beast that we find in this vision that he has. So let's look in verses 15 through 20, and we'll see the fulfillment here. When I, Daniel, had seen the visions, I sought to understand it, and behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man. And I heard the voice of a man between the banks of the Ulai, and he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. So he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Now this gives people a lot of heartburn right here. This is the time of the end of the covenant of the Hebrews. This is the time of the end that's going to lead up to the destruction of the temple that's in Jerusalem. We know that because this pertains to these two specific kingdoms that are here, both the Medo-Persians and the Greeks. All right, so now while he was talking to me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand upright. And he said, Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. All right, so this isn't Lee just trying to dream up an explanation for all that. The Bible tells us precisely what is happening here. All right, so we bank this one. That's what this is about. It's about this kingdom that you see on the screen right here. All right, well, that wasn't the end of that vision. So rewind a little bit to the beginning of chapter 8. And we see beginning in verse 5 there, when I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. Now, relative to Iran, Persia, and Babylon, and Judea, where is Greece and Macedonia located? West. So this kingdom, this invading army comes sweeping out of the west. Over the whole surface, without touching the ground, the goat had conspicuous horn between its eyes. One horn. He came up to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, rushed at him in his mighty wrath. I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram, and he shattered his two horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. Medo-Persia would be defeated by Alexander the Great. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken. Alexander dies young. And in place there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. The kingdom was divided into fourths. We're going to see that here in just a second. All right. We see the fulfillment of this beginning in verse 21. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. All right, so Lee's not guessing again. God is telling us exactly what's about to transpire. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nations, although not with his power. It will be weakened when Alexander dies. In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. This is a fellow named Antiochus Epiphanes IV. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people, and through his shrewdness he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence, and he will magnify himself in his heart. He will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the prince of princes, but he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and mornings which has been told is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. All right, so what is this that he's talking about? Go back to verse 9 in chapter 8. Out of one of them, the four horns, came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful land. It grew up to the host of heaven, and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and to the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking. Another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, "How long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? While the transgression causes horror to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled." He said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, the holy place will be then the holy place will be properly restored." What do you think evenings and mornings might pertain to a place that might be called the holy place in the beautiful land? Evening and morning sacrifices. So they will miss out on 2,300 days worth of these evening and morning sacrifices. So who is this little horn that would arise out of one of those 4 replacement horns for the one horn that was the conqueror? In other words, what happens when Alexander dies afterward that leads us to a fulfillment of this that involves the kingdom of Greece? All right, so he dies, Alexander dies at a very young age. And his kingdom is divided amongst 4 of his generals. Cassander had Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus had Thrace and Asia Minor, all up in modern-day Turkey. Seleucus and the Seleucid dynasty. You probably have heard of this. That's the one that we're going to focus on. He had Syria and the East, and Ptolemy and his dynasty called the Ptolemies had Egypt. So you see, all of this empire that Alexander ruled, that he had conquered, once he's taken out of the picture, it is ungovernable. And so they divide it up. They started out dividing it into ninths, and it was just a mess. And there were civil wars everywhere. And so finally these 4 guys took it. These were his most trusted generals, and they divided up that kingdom. But none of them was as powerful as Alexander was. All right, so it says that one of these, a little host, would arise out of one of those horns. This is the Seleucids. These were the people that governed over Palestine. They governed over Judea. This is the reference made up in verse 9 to the beautiful land. The commander of the host that was challenged and thrown down, the high priest of the Israelites. The hosts that are there are the priests, and all the stars that were there are Jews, and primarily faithful Jews. Remember, they were thrown to the ground and trampled on. The Holy One that comes and tells them how long this is going to be is an angel. And then, of course, the evenings and mornings, the 2,300 evening and mornings, are 2,300 days that all of this will transpire. It's 6 years and 4 months that are going to take place, and that is precisely how long Antiochus Epiphanes rained down terror on the people of Israel. The abomination that makes desolate, the abomination of desolation, he is called. So we have this cessation by force of the temple sacrifices. These people had come out of exile, returned back, they had rebuilt the temple, and now it's taken from them again. So the faithful people were rather upset here. Well, the first thing it said is he took the commander of the host and he threw him down. Well, you had the brother of the high priest. I want you to, kind of picture this. Bribed the king, Antiochus Epiphanes, and was given the high priesthood. Now, just generally speaking, should the high priest of Israel be determined by a bribe that is given to a foreign king who is over the land? Good idea, bad idea? Bad idea. All right, but the system was corrupted here. And then, so he took over from his brother. Well, now who is he beholden to? Antiochus Epiphanes. He's beholden to the king. Who should he be beholden to as the high priest? God. So we have this system that is corrupted. But there was a a problem going on. The Hellenization of Judah, the influence of the Greek society. It's a good thing this is an adult class because it's a little bit touchy. But one of the things that happened here was the construction of a public gymnasium. Doesn't sound like a big deal, except this was a Greek public gymnasium. And as the Greeks did in Greece, they exercised in the nude, just like the original Olympics were there. Well, there were a bunch of Jews in Judea that wanted a gymnasium, and they wanted to be like the Gentiles. And they actually went as far as to have a surgery that hid their circumcision, so that they would be like the Gentiles and not like the Jews. Antiochus Epiphanes murdered mothers who circumcised their sons by strangulation, and put to death the little boys who had been circumcised. Not a nice guy. He's trampling the people of God in the beautiful land. And so this is a horrible thing that he has done. He is a man who, while he ruled there, he vandalized the temple, stole its valuable artifact. He forbade the daily sacrifices. He built an idol on the bronze altar outside of the temple, the most holy place in the temple. And he sacrificed swine on the bronze altar. What's the problem with that? Everybody loves a good barbecue, right? What's wrong with that? It was forbidden by God. That is not what was supposed to happen according to the law of Moses. He compelled the Jews to forsake temple worship, scattered them back to their homes, and he destroyed the sacred books of the law. There's a lot of people that believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls that are found or were found hidden out in the countryside, that they began hiding them as a result of this effort to purge the land of its Bibles, of its sacred books. And so that which continued on until the time of Jesus, that hiding began during this time. What happens when all of the Hebrews lose all of their holy books? And they're no longer allowed to worship in the temple. And the sacrifices are stopped. And how do they know what to do? When the last guy who had the law memorized died, they were in trouble unless they were able to pass it along. Well, there was a scribe named Eleazar. He was charged with, as scribes were, protecting the books. And he and his 5 sons rebelled, and they defeated the Seleucids. This was a revolt that was recorded in the first book of Maccabees, one of the intertestamental books here. But history records this is how they were overthrown, and the control of the temple came back to the Jewish people. This took a physical toll on Daniel, as we've already seen. This was a heady handful to be dropped into his lap for him to deal with and continue on in his service to the king, because he was faithful in doing what he was supposed to do in his life. And this vision was given to him, and it said no one could explain this vision except those angels that told him exactly what happened. And now looking backwards, we can see with 2020 clarity exactly what happened during those times. And the rule of terror, reign of terror of Antiochus Epiphanes lasted almost precisely 2,300 evenings and mornings when they were without. It was a perfect prediction of what was to transpire over the course of 214 years. 2 of the kingdoms that Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel saw visions about, and then the only thing that's going to remain for history is the rise of the Roman Empire. And they came sweeping through about the time of this revolt and took over the land of Judea. And then that 4th kingdom would come into power. In the days of those kings, that kingdom would be established. We made it. I'm about out of breath. Any closing thoughts, comments, questions, yawns, snoring? Matthew.
You say these people had, these kings had great power. Can you, I mean, it seems to me like, history shows that this great power was much to slash and burn,
Oh yeah. That's how empires ruled back in the day.
Yeah, so it's like, you call them good, were they just popular with the people? Or they,
Sometimes. It depends on how gracious the king was to the people. There was a lot of bribery going on, even under the Romans, the bread and circuses concept. As long as he kept the people happy and they had their games in the Colosseum and plenty of bread to eat, they didn't really care what the Senate did. They didn't really care what the emperors did. And that same was true under the Persians. There was a lot of wealth that was brought in by Xerxes. And so the people, as long as they were fat and happy, they were fat and happy. Thank you all.